Right. Hello, thanks for coming. Sorry we're running about 10 minutes late, so but there's quite a lot to cover, so but I'll get through it hopefully. So yes, I'm here to tell you a story, basically. It's a story of how we combined two reasonably large corporate environments into one, and how we dealt with our Mac users. This was a 2-year journey. We'll have a look at it. So just a bit about me. For those that don't know me, my name's Tom Sheard. I have been working in IT for scarily now more than 25 years, since I started it as a summer job whilst I was at uni. I was actually studying history at university, but I did doing a summer job helping the hardware technicians lug monitors around, and then kind of just stayed in IT ever since then. I spent 2 decades working in higher education before I moved to the private sector in early 2020, just before COVID hit, so that was great timing there. I used Macs myself for a long time, and in 2014, my manager at the time, I was working at Leeds College of Music, basically said, hey, we're taking over running 100-odd iMacs in the teaching rooms. Do you want to start managing them? And I was like, okay, fair enough. It was a bit of a baptism of fire, but I've grown from there and I've specialised in Macs ever since. There's a great picture here that Dave Acklam took in the very first Macaduck event in 2015. And you can just make me out sat there looking a bit kind of confused in the corner there. I think I actually still have that shirt somewhere at home as well. So I am one of 2 Apple Mac SMEs for Flutter UK and Ireland. For those who've never heard of Flutter, we are the world's largest sports betting and online gambling company. Here are some of the brands that you may be more familiar with. So I joined what was at the time Sky Betting and Gaming, based in Leeds, in late 2021. In 2022, it was announced that we would be merging with Paddy Power Betfair to form Flutter UK and Ireland. At the time that I joined, Sky Betting, or Sky Bet to give it a shorter name, was pretty much its own standalone operation. Sky Bet had been spun out of the larger Sky Group that you're probably all aware of, the Sky TV Group, in 2015. So it had all the usual things you'd expect of any large organisation. Paddy Power Betfair, or the UK arm of Betfair, had been merging since 2016, and they had only recently finished that merger before it was then announced that we would all be coming together to form Flutter UK and Ireland. So, as with any big corporate merger, project was set up to merge a lot of the internal corporate-facing systems. Thankfully, the bulk of our products were the same across both legacy environments, mostly built around Microsoft 365 and Okta as our primary identity provider. Because we knew we wanted single device management platforms, that was decided to be Microsoft Intune for Windows and mobile devices, and we wanted to maintain using Jamf Pro for our Macs. Now, because of the larger size that you can see from the users here, it was decided that the Paddy Power Betfair environment would be our long-term home for the bulk of our services. So that would become Flutter UK and Ireland, and we would move all of our Sky Bet users across to that environment. However, when it came to our Macs, we were in a slightly different position. We did consider whether we wanted to start greenfield and have a whole new MDM setup, but because there was a proviso to reduce the impact as much as possible, we decided that we would leverage one of our existing environments and consolidate into that. There's some differences here that you can see before we started the process. So whilst the Paddy Power Betfair environment had a larger fleet, it was still hosted on-premise rather than being cloud-hosted. And the other key differences were that the Macs there were not enrolled we're not in ABM, in Apple Business Manager, and we're not enrolled via automated device enrollment. So that kind of helped us make those decisions of what we were going to do. The Macs were also still bound to Active Directory. So what we decided we'd actually do is we would rebrand the Sky Bet instance to Flutter UK and Ireland. This is obviously the opposite of how the bulk of most of the other services were going, in the opposite direction. but it made sense to do it that way. So we would rebrand and move the Paddy Power Betfair devices over. So what we would end up with is for our Mac users, is two migration paths. One moving users from Sky Bet to Flutter UK and Ireland, and one moving Paddy Power Betfair Macs the other way. So whilst we're called Flutter UK and Ireland, that's primarily because that's where our brands are based. Our staff are actually based in quite a lot of other locations. There's some of the big ones on this map that you can see here. Our Mac fleet can be roughly divided into quarters. So we have a quarter based in Leeds, up in Yorkshire. That's the rump of what was Sky Bet. There's a quarter in Porto in Portugal, another quarter in Cluj in Romania, and then the final quarter is split between our other offices. So our offices in Dublin, London, Malta, and we now operate in some of the kind of more international locations as well. All of our staff are hybrid and remote workers on the whole. So that also helped us make some decisions how we were going to do this. Because we knew all of our Windows devices were going to have to be wiped and rebuilt to move them between Intune tenants, we didn't want to go that way for our Macs if we could avoid it. So what we came up with were some user-driven migration paths, which I'll go into detail in a second. And because they were going to be user-driven, they would need to be easy to follow, as solid and as reliable as we could make them, as automated as much as we could, and ultimately to reduce the demands on our internal IT resource because there was only a limited amount of resource to cover all of these processes. So before we could do these migrations, we did need to do quite a bit of groundwork. So some of the things that we did, like I say, as we were changing the Sky Bet instance to be Flutter UK and Ireland, the easiest thing first was rebrand self-service. Change the icon, change the name of it, and change it as much as we could. Apple Business Manager, like I was mentioned, our Paddy Power Betfair devices were not in, whilst there was an instance there, the Macs had never been enrolled into it. So it made sense for us to consolidate into one instance, that would be the Sky Bet instance. And going forward, we would say, we demanded that all devices were only going to be enrolled via automated device enrollment, which meant we obviously needed to get all of the local resellers in all the different countries added into that ABM, and also make sure that our local tech teams had the training and the access to add machines using Apple Configurator if and when they ever got wiped and rebuilt to get them into Apple Business Manager. The Okta tenant that I've already touched on was very useful to us because that was fed via accounts from both legacy environments. That was useful during this migration kind of merger process. So what we did was we switched from using the old legacy on-prem AD integration with Jamf to using Okta for our SSO into self-service and into the admin portal, and also for LDAP lookups. And that also removed some of the last bits of legacy on-prem infrastructure that was linked into our Sky Bet / Flutter UK and Ireland instance. At the same time as this was happening, the legacy Microsoft 365 conditional access functionality that Jamf and Microsoft had been using for years was going end of life, that I'm sure anyone who uses that and has used that is aware of. So we wanted to include that in the migration process and move that forward. So to do that, to facilitate that, we put some rules in our 365 policies to facilitate that and kind of deal with that during the migration process. But to move to the new device compliance functionality that Jamf and Microsoft released, we needed to be hosted in Jamf Cloud. So we did a lift and shift database migration last year to move from Trams Cloud to Jamf Cloud, whilst maintaining our custom DNS alias that we already had. So that was quite low impact, but that opened the door for us to be able to use that functionality. We did a big audit of all the settings that we were applying on both our Paddy Power Betfair and our Sky Bet Macs. Did a big comparison of what they all were, said, right, which ones do we need to apply? Got that agreed with our divisional security team. Also gave us the opportunity to remove some older settings that were no longer relevant to OSs that were no longer in use. Biggest kind of hurdle that we had was our 802.1x networking. As I'm sure anyone who's had to deal with corporate certificate-based networking for the test, it can be a bit of a pain sometimes. And as we were in effect, the Paddy Power Betfair Cisco ICE environment would need to be integrated with a new Jamf instance that was hosted externally. So that took quite a bit of time to get certificates trusted and issued and get that integration working. But once that was done, that unlocked the door for the rest of it. Another thing that we had to consider, root certificates as an organization that's grown from lots of different smaller organizations. We have a lot of legacy intermediate root certs and CAs, which we had to make sure that they were deployed en masse so that people, especially our developers, were not going to be impacted when they migrated. And we also took an opportunity just to do a mass tidy up in both Jamf instances to make sure that only devices and policies and everything that was actually correct and in order. So early 2024, last year, all that groundwork was done, and we were like, right, from now on, all new devices have to come out of the new Jamf instance, block enrolling into the old one, and then we knew we had a finite number of machines that we'd have to deal with. So, as I say, the first migration path that we did, and this was actually during 2023, was migrating identities. So this was to move users out of the Sky Betting and gaming environment into the Flutter UK and I environment. All the Macs, when it came to the Mac, altogether there was about, I think, about 2,500 users that had to go through this process, of which about 1,000 were Mac users at the time. They were all using Jamf Connect, which we had always traditionally used the username prefix, so like ben.wyatt, as you can see here in this example, to create the local macOS user account, which really helped us. Because in the new tenant, 99% of people, thankfully, were unique. There was a couple of John Smiths and things like that, replications that had to be more customly dealt with. But the bulk of people, thankfully, were pretty unique, so they could just have a new account in the new environment with the same username and email prefix. So what that allowed us to do was come up with most of the migrations we did, as you'll see, were mostly shell scripts using Swift Dialog for the Windows. So we would guide the user, they would start it from self-service. We would uninstall Jamf Connect because we found it actually functioned better if we took that out of the mix temporarily. We would remove these these user attributes from the user account. These are the things that tie and stamp a user account to a cloud identity using Jamf Connect. So we'd remove them so the Mac account was effectively just a local Mac account temporarily. We switched the profiles for Jamf Connect, which would get it to point to the new identity provider. And then we would reinstall Jamf Connect. It would point to the new one, and we'd force a log out of the user. The user signs in with their new username, and because the username prefix would match, it would match the existing local account on the machine, prompt for some passwords to get it all back into alignment, and the user was logged back into their existing local account. Then we just did some follow-on stuff, like we'd apply a new corporate wallpaper and some other build settings, rename the host name and stuff like that. To set the wallpaper, we used Armin Briegel's Desktopper tool, which, if anyone's not come across it, thoroughly recommend it. The other piece that we had to do for these users was their 365 account. So obviously their content, their Exchange email account and their OneDrive SharePoint content was migrated in the background, and once that is done, the users would be prompted to run another migration tool, which leveraged the tools from officereset.com to do a factory reset of the Office account, the 365 apps, and then guide them to sign back in with their new account. It would pull a license down, pull all the content down, and they were sorted. That was mostly 2023. We got all those people moved across, and they were effectively UKI'd. They were sorted going forwards. So the other ones that we needed to deal with were the devices. And this was a bit more fun part of the process. So so we knew that by the beginning of 2024, that there were, as I say, about 1,400 Macs that would need to be migrated across. Thankfully, we have a reasonably quick recurring asset refresh program. So we knew that about a third of them were due for replacement last year anyway, so we could take them out of scope, especially as we were looking to get rid of all of our Intel devices. Hopefully, by the end of this month, we'll be rid of all of our last Intel Macs, touch wood. So that still left us with about 800 Macs that would need to be migrated without wiping. So for these ones, again, lots of shell scripts and Swift dialog windows. But the user, they would initiate it from self-service. We would use extension attributes that were based on some local files on the machine in Jamf that would get updated, drop the machine into a specific smart group so it would unscope the bulk of our production policies and profiles off the Mac in the source Jamf Pro instance. We found that we had to uninstall some of our agents because when it moves between MDM servers and the profiles get pulled off, some agents really don't like playing if they lose their PPPC and their system extension accesses temporarily, and they just fall over and complain. And so we found it was better to remove some of them. You may recognize some of these icons. They were the ones that were the worst that we had to get rid of or remove temporarily. We would then trigger an unenrollment from the source MDM and then trigger a binary and an MDM enrollment into the new Jamf server. For this part of the process, we used a tool called Jamf Migrate, which I'll touch on in a second. Once they were in the new Jamf server, we'd install Jamf Connect and prompt the user to log out. They would then, and the Jamf Connect at that point had the migrate and demobilize keys enabled, so that the user would log in via enter ID with their existing account, because these were people that already existed in that tenant. Pick their local account, which was based on their SAM account name, because these were AD-bound machines originally. That would be demobilized by Jamf Connect, turned into a local account, and linked to their cloud identity. And then once they were fully logged back in and everything was okay, unbind the Mac from AD, rename it to meet our new naming convention, update all those extension attributes again to pull it into the kind of production policies and profiles in the new MDM server. And that would trigger a reissue of some certificates, especially the ones for our 802.1x networking and our VPN client. And then we reinstall the agents that we'd removed at the beginning once their required kind of accesses were back on the machine. Altogether, there's a couple of other bits. The other bit that we also had to do was make sure we removed the old Jamf management account, because obviously that still sat on the machine but was no longer being used because a new one was created when it was re-enrolled. So we tidied that up. We also removed the local IT admin account because we've moved to a lapse solution in the new instance. Altogether, that process took about 30 minutes per machine. That did include some padding to give time for configuration profiles to pull down. Altogether, it probably was more like just under 20 minutes, give or take. But I'd say we added enough padding in there to make sure that it would all happen in the right order. So Jamf Migrate that we used, this is a paid product from Jamf Professional Services. We had originally planned to do the unenrollment and the re-enrollment part ourselves and script that, and we started doing that, and then whilst we were chatting with our Jamf team, they said, oh, we've got Jamf Migrate, why don't you leverage that to do that part? It can actually do more of the process than what we used it for, but because we'd already started putting the rest of the pieces together, we just kind of put it into the middle of our workflow. It can do profile-based enrollment like we used, or it can trigger an MDM, an automated device enrollment method. But as I say, these Macs were not in ABM. We would have to maintain, still using a kind of manual profile installment. So for that, it would elevate the user temporarily to an admin and guide them with on-screen windows like this to say, right, go here, click, install the MDM profile, and then it would demote them again afterwards. It's a very robust process. It's got launch agents running, so if the user decides that they don't want to do it, it will just keep hassling them until they do it. And thankfully, nobody didn't follow the instructions or almost nobody didn't. The other part is we specified for it to prompt the user for their password, which it would then use to escrow the FileVault recovery key to the new Jamf Pro server and also sort out the bootstrap token. So yeah, I'll say it's a paid product, but it's not that expensive considering how much time it saved us, and I would thoroughly recommend it. Additional steps that we also did was that once everything was sorted, we'd prompt the user to register their machine for device compliance using self-service. Once we could see that they'd done that and the Mac was fully compliant, we'd remove them from the workarounds that we'd put in place earlier on in the process, and then they were sorted. The other thing we had to deal with was recovery lock. Because these Macs had not been enrolled via automated device enrollment, the recovery lock wasn't set on them. So we used a slightly tweaked version of Rebecca Latimer's script that you can see linked here, we'd run that every day. It would check which machine didn't have recovery lock set, and it would do an API, send a command to the Jamf Pro API to send and set recovery lock MDM command to those devices, and then escrow the recovery lock password back to Jamf. And that all pretty went reasonably seamlessly. So how did it go? Overall, it took us maybe 6 weeks of a lot of design work, testing last summer. My poor little M1 MacBook Air was probably wiped and rebuilt, DFU wiped like 50, 60 times whilst we kept trying it, testing it, testing it. We then rolled out to an initial pilot of 50 Macs within our kind of close IT teams. That got some useful feedback, especially for the documentation, that really helped going forwards. And then we released in batches of 200 Macs over 4 weeks in autumn last year. And altogether, it took us, as I say, 12 weeks to get to 99%. As you tend to expect with these things, there was a big take-up initially, and then it was the stragglers. There was a bit of a lull here, but that was over Christmas. So really, it was more like 10 weeks because we kind of pretty much stopped the process over Christmas. I believe the highest we ever got was 60 Macs in 1 day that managed to do the migration. Altogether, 85% of people did it without needing any help. We had a dedicated Slack channel and other methods of getting help, but almost everybody managed to do it without actually ever asking for any help from us, thankfully. And of the 15% that did, half of them were just, here's the user guide, have you read the user guide, follow the user guide. There was only less than 1%, so I think it was less than 8, I think it was about 6 or 7 that were completely balked, that we couldn't resolve. And I'll touch on the issues in a second. And they were ones that had to be rebuilt. But 99% we got there and they all got sorted. So it wasn't really an issue, but another thing that we wanted to deal with was activation lock. For those that don't know, if you don't disable the ability to enable activation lock when you enroll a Mac via automated device enrollment, if a user signs in with their personal Apple ID, which we allow, and then turns on Find My Mac, it will go, this is a personal Apple device, I'm going to lock it to that personal Apple ID, which we didn't want because that causes issues when that user leaves or the Mac needs to be rebuilt. Thankfully, this was only 5% of machines in scope, but for those, we used Brian Van Pesky's unactivation lock tool, which would prompt the users to say, hey, go turn off Find My Mac, please. Once they'd done that, we then pushed a config profile that blocked the ability to turn on Find My Mac. And that's them. So around 8% of Macs that had issues, almost all of them were passwords. Again, I'm sure anyone who's had to support AD-bound Macs with FileVault enabled has come across the issues of passwords getting out of sync, even if you use things like Nomad. It's still... And this migration kind of brought stuff to the surface, brought machines out of the woodwork that people have probably been living with mismatched passwords for years. But it caused an issue primarily because the part in the migration when it would prompt them for their password to escrow the FileVault key, that would fail if they didn't enter the right password. So that was almost all the issues that we had. So for those ones, sometime we did deploy Escrow Buddy, which again is linked here, another great tool. That did help with some of those ones where it could do the automatically escrowing the key for them. Other ones, it was a matter of getting access to the machine and disabling FileVault or using the sysadmin_ctl command to tidy up and fix the FileVault issues, get their passwords into sync, and then make sure the new key was escrowed to Jamf Pro. And also, similarly, the bootstrap token, if there was passwords issues, would also cause problems. For that, the profiles install type bootstrap token command that you can use to try and deal with that. We had historically our Paddy-Power Betfair machines, the local IT admin account was secure token, had a secure token. So for those ones where we knew that was an issue, some of them we were able to leverage that account to fix the bootstrap token. And that worked on some of them, and then other ones it did require some manual intervention. And then, I'd say the worst case scenarios, that 1% that we just couldn't get over the line, they ended up having to be wiped and rebuilt, but they were thankfully a small minority. So that's, as I say, that's kind of, we're approaching 3 years since this wider divisional merger started happening. We're very much at the mop-up stage now. The bulk of at least the corporate internal stuff from Skybet into Flutter UK and Ireland is pretty much done now, and the last remaining bit should be gone from a developer-facing side in the next few months. So what kind of things did we learn from this? Key, as you'd expect, preparation, testing, doing your processes again and again so you know what's going to happen, and recognizing issues. Obviously, you can't account for every eventuality. There's always some weird edge cases out there, but try to deal with, try to preempt them as best you can. Guide rails are having a path so that once the Mac or the user has started on a process, that they follow it as best you can to completion. You can't stop people wandering off halfway through, as some people seem to somehow do, but most of the people, it's like, right, you've done it, right, we're not going to let you do other stuff to the machine until you finish this process. Actually, one thing I realized I didn't mention was that during the migration process, the MDM stuff, this was happening autumn last year, so we also were able to use the carrot of macOS Sequoia to say, right, if you want Sequoia, you've got to migrate your Mac. And I think that shot up the big spike initially, and that encouraged quite a few to get it done. Comms and documentation. Our documentation, I say we got some really nice feedback from a few people saying, some of the best documentation they've seen of, screenshots saying literally click here, do this, click here, do this. If this happens, do this. And if not, we had a support channel that we could help people with. Keeping track, it could get a bit tedious sometimes, having to say, right, who's done it, mark them off on a spreadsheet and show them. But it meant that we could see, right, they've got so far, why have they not finished? What kind of issues do we need to reach out and help them? It also helped that you could give stats, nice pie charts to senior management, say, hey, this is how the project's going. And that, as I say, fed into identifying issues and trying to find solutions for them as quick as we could. The speed of the process, we maybe could have done it a bit faster, but given the resources that we had, because especially the MDM part, we already had the internal resources to call upon, and this had to be done at the same time as keeping the lights on and other work that was going on at the time. So I think we kept the balance pretty good. At no point were we massively overwhelmed, and we weren't able to cope, so I think we balanced that pretty well. Downsides, the biggest one is just that the Macs are still not in ABM. So we can't use our standard remote wipe and zero-touch build process on those particular Macs. But they are a subset, and with an asset refresh going forwards, they'll hopefully all be replaced in the next maybe 2 to 3 years. But that's a price that we knew we'd have to pay to go this route, when the other option was get them all in, wipe them and rebuild them. And given our remote workforce and the demands that was going to be, that just wasn't a realistic process that we were going to be able to do. So we did all this. We were targeting to get finished earlier this year. We pretty much are done. We thought, right, we've finished all this merger. We can focus on doing some other cool things, like DDM or platform single sign-on, all this kind of cool stuff. And then earlier this year, it was announced that there would be another corporate reorganization within Flutter, and we're still waiting for the ins and outs and the exact, how it's going to work and who's going where and what's happening. But we're facing the prospect of probably another 6 months of merger work, moving more people in or moving stuff across. But the plus side is it's what we've been doing for years, so we've got the experience again. But it'll probably be different, so we'll see how that one goes. So just a couple of thanks just to finish up. Huge thanks to my fellow Mac SME at Flutter UK and Ireland, Dave Jackson, who's sat here, who most of this wouldn't have happened without Dave's involvement. Also to our manager, Carl, who's flown over from Ireland just to see this presentation. Also, for those that might watch it on YouTube later, just a big thanks to the awesome teams within Workplace Tech in Flutter UK and Ireland. We've got some great members of staff. We're really lucky. Also, a thanks out to Tom Maguire, who's sat here, for helping us with our migration to Jamf Cloud. I'll be honest, Tom did most of that work, even though we were moving away from them as a provider. He made that really painless. So that was massively appreciated. Andrew Needham for Jamf Professional Services for Jamf Migrate, which, as I did save us a lot of time, and he helped us with suggestions and support over the time. Bart Reardon and the folks that maintain Swift Dialogue, without which these processes wouldn't have been possible. Anyone who's not used Swift Dialogue, just play around with it. It's awesome. Finally, just a thanks to the Mac Admins Foundation. As you've probably all heard, Foundation's what pays for the Mac Admin Slack. That helped to, again, we couldn't have done that. Frankly, I couldn't have built my career without the Mac Admin Slack, and hence being a proud member of it. And just the community as a whole, and for some of the tools that we managed to leverage. We really are kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in this community, and we're very thankful for that. I don't know if we have time for questions, because we were running late, albeit that's actually taken me 10 minutes less than I thought, probably because I've talked a bit fast. I may have missed some parts, but there you go. Has anybody got any questions?
Just a quick one. You mentioned batching users, groups of 200. Did you do anything clever to kind of let somebody know that they'd come into scope and point them towards the self-service tools, or was it? They would get email comms in the run-up to it. Then they would get a Slack message to say, hey, there's this new thing, you need to go do it, with a link to the user guide. And it was at that point that we would make it available in self-service. And most people would just follow that as they went. But we didn't do... Actually, no, I think at the end we did end up having some on-screen messages just for the real stragglers saying, hey, you've still not done this, you've still not done this. But thankfully, almost all of them did it of their own back, especially with that temptation of saying, if you want Sequoia, you've got to do this. And that got them over. Anybody else? Okie dokie. If you do have any questions, come and find me afterwards or give me a shout on Slack. There's my username. And thank you very much.